Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. Change is imminent for Canadian vapers and the vaping industry, that much is certain. Provincially, the Nova Scotia government's flavour ban is set to take effect on April 1st. In Ontario, there's saber-rattling over flavours, and the government of British Columbia is pushing a 10-point plan designed to crush vaping, which could also serve as a template for Alberta and other vape-wary provinces. Federally, Health Canada continues to advance cautiously a prescriptive approach that would demand more from the industry in order to save flavors and to stay viable. And joining us today to discuss the regulatory machinations taking place across the country is Darryl Tempest, Executive Director and Lead Advocate from the Canadian Vaping Association. Darryl, thanks for joining us again on RegWatch.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you bet. And look, the last time we had you on the show was really our last episode of 2019. It was like December 19th, and we only did the episode because of that late-breaking news. And it was rather troubling news of infractions, something around the tune of 80,000. I think it's really important for us to pick up from exactly that spot, fill our audience in again. What were those infractions all about? And in the last, month and a half now of 2020, has there been fallout from that?
Well, there's been a lot of follow-up. So when we look at what the infractions were, talking with Health Canada, a lot of it was to come around the TVPA and labeling requirements. So what we saw was a lot of still a lot of old labels that had things like animals and characters and things that were really set out in the TVPA that had said that they were now illegal. And if you look at how the TVPA came through, there was a ton of time for the industry to become compliant. So one of the things in our follow-up conversations with Health Canada is they've asked what action we've taken as an industry.
And what action has there been taken, I guess, is my big question.
Well, from us, it's really making sure that people understand what the TVPA is. So if you look at the industry itself, you have what's known as a lot of big players in terms of how you define like big tobacco, Juul, like things like that, that have really large organizations. But the industry itself has always been grassroots. So you're looking at a lot of entrepreneurs that have one shop, two shops, small manufacturing, so on and so forth. So what we're able to showcase for Health Canada is how we worked with our regulatory lawyer to make sure that there was a simplified version of the TVPA so that manufacturers understood very clearly in layman's language. And we gave that template to Health Canada. And then if you look through as we come through the next steps, which is Gazette 2, which is now the new labeling and packaging standards, we've been able to put together guidance, right, which is not legal representation, but it certainly gives the industry a complete understanding of our interpretations of what those guidelines mean in order to make sure that the industry is compliant. And that's really from Health Canada's perspective, is they haven't gone overboard like a lot of the provinces have to overreact to the vaping illnesses and putting everything into the same bucket. But that being said, they clearly want to define what they believe is not only in the best interest of vapers, but also what's in the best interest of Canadians, specifically around youth.
Yes. So I think you danced around, though, some of the more criticism that you had for the vape shops before Christmas. So has that softened a little bit?
I don't think it's softened. What my hope is that we all understand again, and this is a core message that I said before. We're all in this together. So if we go through Gazette 2, for example, and previously under the first real round of inspections, we had 80,000 infractions. If you look at the new labeling templates and new guidelines that are going to have to come out, we can't go through that again. So if you're coming up to July 1st, they've given us time, they've been prescriptive. The onus is on us to make sure that we are compliant with exactly the guidelines I set out in Gazette 2. In addition to that, if you look at some of the options the government has given, is they've allowed for things like labels and boxes and other items to make sure that if you can't get everything that you need, besides things like health warnings and very prescriptive things that have to be on the label itself, and where they need to be, they've actually allowed opportunities for us to move that around. So it really, a lot of it comes to when they went through the first consultations on this, looking at the availability and what could be on the bottle. They really took their time to understand that. And so now when we look at our role and how we have to be responsible partners, then I mean, you just have to look to the US in terms of how knee-jerk reactions and high level lawmakers saying your product just kills people, you're not moral human beings, as opposed to this industry that was born from people who got the gift of vaping. So one of the things that we say to government at a federal level and across all of these provinces in our nation is that 90% of the industry, of those who are entrepreneurs within the industry, are former smokers who are trying to give this gift back to others, just as they received it as this cottage industry began to grow to a $500 million industry that we see in Canada today.
I would say that there's probably a few more people out there in Canada that are a bit more pessimistic than you sound today.
When you look at if you look at the industry as a whole, right? I think one of the criticisms that the provinces have of the federal government is they haven't acted fast enough. And they haven't acted fast enough, not to regulation, not to bringing in a transformative and a disruptive technology that vaping is, and the positive impact that can have, is that it wasn't reacting fast enough to misinformation through the media, a complete misunderstanding of what vaping is, from water soluble to oil soluble, to how the diseases and the lung illnesses in the United States came around, so that a ton of provinces knee jerk their reactions, because I believe fundamentally Health Canada sees this as a harm reduction opportunity for Canadians. So if you look at the data, and we talk about this a lot in from 2012, the 45,000 deaths in Canada. So that's dated information, and let's assume as the years have gone by and that's come down a little bit due to decreasing smoking rates. One thing you can say is that what would you do to save 30,000 Canadians or 20,000 Canadians? I think that's the approach that Health Canada is taking. And the other thing is that they want to see this industry as it should be. So when you say on the brink, one of the things that I've seen since the last time we talked to today is the the participants in this industry are on the brink is actually big tobacco, right? And their entry,
Well,
right? Because
they certainly have been chased for a long time. There's no doubt.
they have been chased by a long time. So what I would say to you is this, Brent, in terms of their entry in 2018, right? So we'll talk about March through the TVPA regulation in Canada, and then through to December 18 when we got the first real highlights into youth uptake, right? What changed? Two core elements changed. The first core element is the distribution channel opened up. So I'm not talking about every convenience store is selling to youth or getting along that pathway. What I'm saying is that if we look in Ontario, Alberta, BC, there was a ton of advertising, right? There was a ton of exposure to this product, which is obviously going to drive curiosity, right? The second thing that changed is that, and I've talked to hundreds of shops across this country. As you know, I did a coast to coast tour leading up in the fourth quarter of last year. Pardon me. And one of the things that I asked shop owners is who sold nicotine products over 24 milligrams prior to 2017.
Right.
I had one shop owner say that they did. So if you look at the differences here, is that it is these like really high nic products that were introduced to a market not completely focused on adult smokers and their conversion to a less harmful alternative. So if you see the federal government they took their time. So BC was the first out of the gate in terms of a nicotine reduction, and then making flavors only available through adult-only vape shops. But that was a way to ensure that they had an adult-only vape shop market available to them to regulate and work with,
Mhm.
as opposed to what is actually the key drivers of flavors. So if you look at the data from NRT, as we know for years and years, and those products have been around for decades, their success rate is capped at around 10% of success. If you look at the most pessimistic view of the data for vaping products, it's 18% at the most pessimistic view. What's the difference between them? It's flavoring.
Well, and on flavors, let me be, straight up on this is that I don't understand how anybody could even think that there was vaping without flavors. So you hear this data coming out of, some Canadian surveys going, and 5% vape with no flavor. And even in BC's 10-point plan and in their intentions paper, they make the same claim that there's somehow a significant number of BC young people that are vaping without flavor. And I just don't understand that. Somebody who's been around maybe the industry longer than I have, or has, obviously talked to people who have, I've never met anybody that has said to me, there is unflavored e-cigarettes. Like, what does that even mean?
Well, that's true. And one of the things that we've talked to government is that normalizing tobacco flavors as a way to get people off of tobacco is somewhat insane. But more importantly, is why are the flavors so important? The flavors are important because of the limbic system, which is biological and psychological, right? It's the system we have within our own bodies that have positive associations attached to flavoring. So you're taking it out to of this argument that flavors are important, or more importantly, it's my right. I hear that a ton, right? I have the right to do this. I have the right to do that. Government has the right to get the hell out of my way. But if you really dig into the fact that, you know what, in the parliamentary system, that argument was really settled about 200 years ago. And we have to sit, and we talked about this in a societal context. We have to fit with Canadians. And remember, we talked about Canadians that vape, Canadians that smoke, and the 80% of Canadians that do neither.
So I'm gonna stop you there for a second because I
Yeah.
disagree. That
Yeah.
approach, what you just described, is a progressive approach, and that believes that yes, there are such things as individuals out there, but society is prior to the individual. So the individual doesn't really matter in the end if enough people can agree, or a small number of people with power can agree on what's good for everybody and what's for everybody's better good, right? So, but that for individuals gets squashed. So, if you want to say that this has been decided over 200 years because of democracy, well, then maybe you're right. I was just telling somebody the other day that democracy is a left-wing socialist progressive thing. It's mob rules, and also the elite are very much there, and the progressive, they're the regulators, and they get to decide.
But if you are trying to make sure that vaping through the from the time that the crisis started, right, which would be August 15 of 2019.
Right, but first you're assuming that I agree, or that the large majority of vapers agree that this was really a crisis. They saw it as a ginned up media event that a lot of people, a lot of young people used e-cigarettes because they saw the media, not the advertising, the media. So you tell kids that something's cool, they're going to do it.
Not just the media, government was one of the largest marketing of this product. So that one thing I will say is that if you have a teen or a preteen in Canada, you've had a conversation about vaping at your table between October of 2019 and today, guaranteed.
Sure.
Every single family has had this conversation. Unfortunately, I would, the vast majority would have that conversation with a lot of misinformation. So if we're going to start to peel back the onion, right, rather than just flailing our arms and saying this isn't fair and I have my rights and everyone should just, um, we've always talked about the opportunity for engagement and education from a CVA perspective, and CVA has been around since 2014 as a response to the Ontario government and the BC government that first came out with regulations long before the federal government did. We have never had this level of engagement from government, ever. They're asking great questions. So you talk about the 10-point plan and the intention papers that they had in BC. What I can tell you is that government put out their intention papers to actually learn. And they took the feedback from that. The onus was on us to give them very detailed responses, not just a response, this is my right, or this is, you don't know what you're doing, but to actually get down to this is why this wouldn't be compliant for the bottles, for example, federally, and doing those templates and making those investments with them. Not only have they appreciated that, but they've been very engaged in those conversations for us to show them.
So, is
Almost
there,
every,
Darryl? Let me just
yep,
interrupt you here for a second, if I may, because I've thought this now for a while that there's a kind of been a good cop, bad cop thing, or at least if that could uh, be the right term for it, when you've got vapors out there at least pushing the rights issue, as individual vapors should do, because any individual should have control over what they put in their own body, right? Isn't,
yep.
and that's the point about marijuana and so many other things that nobody has a problem with, it seems. It's just nicotine that they do. But you can go ahead and choose to put nicotine in your body as long as it's through a delivery mechanism that kills you. So if you can choose to do that, and the government's fine with that, and it seems that most people in public health, while they tut on that, they know that every smoker that exists out there is job security for them if they're in tobacco control. So on one side, you've got individuals out there. There should be nothing wrong with them fighting the rights issue, and then you've got great, organizations like CVA who are banging it out, not on rights, but on the labels and the nicotine and really hitting on all the nitty gritty points that individuals can't really do anyhow, but you can as the association. And I think there might be some headway is being made because of that.
I think we're seeing a lot of headway. So if you look at what they were calling for the last time we talked, Ontario was under a ton of pressure to ban flavors. BC had announced before they went through their new proposed regulations to ban flavors. PEI has now announced that they were going to ban flavors. Nova Scotia has actually gone through a regulatory change to ban flavors.
Right.
The place that we're at now is ground zero for flavors is in Nova Scotia. So if you look at what we're asking for in BC, is that they're saying, okay, what we need to do is this is a new technology. We got a chance to do it right. And they're asking to make sure to have a platform to do that right. So if you look at the argument isn't, I think they should pull cigarettes out of every convenience store as well, right? And the convenience store association tried to say, no, we're the champion, and it's the vape shops that are causing all the problems and have all the infractions. I find that kind of rich, considering the fact that they've spent generations and years selling tobacco products and getting Canadians addicted to tobacco products. They could have stopped that practice at any time. And if you look at it on the other side, when it comes to marketing, it's become a huge issue in terms of the fact that that's what Canadians saw. So
Right.
if you look at the vape shops, right, when this was a cottage industry, when this was we were asking for this kind of attention from government. We were asking to engage in these conversations since 2014. Now the conversations are happening. So it's defining of this new technology, of this life-saving technology that's going to really have the opportunity for us to move forward and to be able to offer Canadians an unprecedented opportunity to save lives, to finally eradicate the scourge of combustible tobacco. And nicotine on its own, I agree. And we say it all the time. It's no different than caffeine. So the hypocrisy of saying you need to control vape products with nicotine and flavoring, but you can sell any Starbucks or any Tim Hortons and cafe au laits and spice lattes and all that kind of stuff. I don't disagree. Our board doesn't disagree with the hypocrisy of any of that. What we will tell you is that we couldn't stand by and allow flavors, which are the key component to this to these products, to be available not only for the thousands of vapors, hundreds of thousands of vapors across Canada, but also to the 5 million Canadians that may look at this as a harm reduction opportunity. So I agree with you. I think individuals and the organizations that are standing up, the protests and rallies that are happening across the country here this weekend, we 100% stand by those individuals and consumers, because what has been missed in this fight, and you talk about the individual rights and then organizations such as ours that have the technical ability to talk to government and get regulation and legislation right, is that I've heard from hundreds of elected officials across this country that say, I have 5, 6 families coming into my office every day saying, stop this. I don't want it in my schools. I don't want it near my children. Stop it. And then they say, do you know how many vapors come into my office to tell me that flavors save their life? That flavors are the key component for them? None.
Well, vapors are not. There's some vapors, obviously, that are very active and they're there. This has also been a very, very long fight, and so you can get a bunch of these parents that are only just newly misinformed about vaping, and there's no cost to them to to get in the face of somebody and complain about vaping. Meanwhile, there's a lot of vapors out there that are beaten down.
So, oh, you talked to me, Brent, about saying that a lot of the problem here is that we're not respecting the individual rights. And that democracy, I think, using your term, is meant for the populace and doesn't respect the individual.
Yeah, it's the old thing that's what's democracy? It's two wolves and a sheep trying to decide what to have for lunch, right?
Okay.
That's
So,
the democracy there doesn't work out so much for the sheep, right?
yeah, but if we can't organize and actually go through the effort of every single one of us, and there's 1.1 million vapors now in Canada. So if 1.1 million vapors can't pick up the phone and call their provincial member and their federal member to explain these things, how would anyone know? Right? It's
Well, it's
they're
like I
your
mean,
representative.
yeah. Well, I'm trying to understand exactly. Just a bit. I'm a bit confused a bit because there's been a lot of vapors doing stuff over the years. I mean, Maria P. Had 10,000 postcards sent in. On the federal level, there's been always been strong lobbying in Ontario by vapors, and we're about to see hopefully people turn out here in British Columbia coming up this weekend. And I don't want to do the pitch yet because this is a strong question. Are you saying that even whatever's has been done, it's just not been enough? It's not rated.
I think you answered my point better than I can. Health Canada is taking their time, getting it right, and talk about those postcards, talk about those engagements. Ontario, with what they have, what we're hearing in terms of what their regulations are going to look for, is that they're balancing youth uptake, access, and the value that product vape shops bring for high nicotine products and vapor products. Where has the engagement been strongest? At the federal level and in Ontario.
Right. Right. So let's. I know I do agree that there's been an impact. I would say Rights for Vapers is doing an event this weekend on Saturday. Now I was going to check actually to see if there was any changes in the time. There's a bunch of protests that have been going on, as everyone well knows, with the Aboriginal community across the country. And so I'm just seeing here if there's going to be any changes, and I'll know in 1 second. All is the same. So thanks, Sherwin Edwards, who's one of the organizers. So this is a media release. The media invited to attend 2 rallies hosted by Rights for Vapers, where British Columbia vapers and vape shop owners will call on the provincial government to protect the rights of vapers and adult smokers to choose a less harmful alternative to smoking. Vapor products can help smokers quit, limiting access and banning flavors will stop smokers from switching and put the lives of British Columbians at risk. So this will be at, the first one is in the morning in Victoria at 9 a.m. in BC Parliament Building, Ledge, front lawn and steps. And then at 2 p.m. will be the Vancouver Art Gallery on Hornby Street, so just downtown Vancouver. That actually is just like 4 blocks away from our studio. We're right downtown. So hopefully the plan will be is that Sherwin and Dr. Chris Lalonde, who will be speaking in Victoria, they're going to take a float plane over. And then once they get here, I'm just a couple blocks also from the float plane dock. So get them over here. So for our audience out there, just keep a watch for a live RegWatch for like about 15-20 minutes. We'll do that here in the studio. So it'll be great to actually have some people here and do a live interview, and then we'll go cover the event and then put some footage up after. And then there's also something going on too in Nova Scotia, is there not?
Yes, that's what I understand. That it's their sister events. One's going to happen in British Columbia, and one is going to happen in Nova Scotia right before the opening of the February 20 legislative opening.
Now, this is one of the first, kind of across the country, coordinated events that I can think of. VAO, Vapers Advocates of Ontario, have done great stuff in Ontario. We've gone and covered that on the occasion. But correct me if I'm wrong, this seems to be the first kind of coordinated across the country thing.
No, I think so, and it's a phenomenal opportunity for especially consumers, because one thing I hear about, and Brent, you know our membership as well as everybody, that we're made up of retailers and manufacturers. We get a lot of consumers to say, "What can I do?" Because that's what elected officials respond to, right? Our job is, as you described, is very technical. Right? It's very much about how to try to balance the needs of legislation and balance the needs for access of product. But in order to make sure to put a face to those who we're fighting for, they are going to have far more power than we will through events such as this. So whether you call it a protest, I would call it a rally. It's an opportunity to educate and make Canadians and lawmakers understand what the impact this has had. So, Brent, as you know, I've done a ton of media since September.
Yeah.
Far more. I've never been in the media as much as I have been from September on till now, right? And a complete misunderstanding, so that they set a narrative of not only a product that they didn't understand, but a user base that they didn't understand. So the face that got put to vaping was a 16-year-old child vaping 4 pods out of a Tim Hortons cup. And I had a member call me today who went in to see an MLA out in Atlantic, Canada, who had no idea that we weren't all big tobacco. So their whole premise of judging this industry was on big tobacco. So as we move forward and try to really understand, we all play a role, from the consumers to the advocates to organizations like the CVA that really dig into the tactical, because at the end of the day, if you're going to start to get your information right, that's our real job, right? But we talk about 1.1 million vapors across this country, and if you look at governments like Nova Scotia, they were never taken into account. Tens of thousands of Nova Scotians weren't taken into account. Besides the fact, and we've been very public on this, whether it be in media or whether it be talking with opposition, such as the Conservative Party or the New Democrats Party, is that that policy will have no impact on youth vaping. None.
Right.
Zero. Right? All it does is it opens up the pathway to black market products, opens up the pathway to taking products from places like China, or, by the way, online retailers from provinces such as Ontario will be more than happy to service those clients, or take the 2-hour drive to Moncton and buy all you want and then sell it unregulated.
So I believe that people who are, ardent anti-vapors are demonstrating an old school conservative trait. They don't like change. They don't like change. They don't like technology. They want to control other people's lives. They're very risk averse. I mean, they're not liberal. They're not left even. They're conservative. They're a new kind of conservative, except just maybe remove the religious part. But if you can remove religion and think of kind of some of the old school conservatives, that's these progressives running around right now that, and they're so risk adverse. It's insane. The entire society has gone off the rails when it comes to safety. So, if you look at it, and I'll be doing more and more from this great book and other books on fear, but the safety imperative. In the first instance, society's obsession with safety should be understood as a sublimated expression of its magnification of harm, which is meshed with its low level of tolerance for distress, injury, and pain. So when you've got this low level of tolerance for distress, injury, and pain, and it just magnifies the safety culture that goes around, it creates these crises, to use your word, and these fear-mongering and scaremongering. You get moms running into principals' offices with their head cut off, right, over something like this, because they're programmed in this safety culture. They don't allow kids. You can't let kids throw snowballs anymore. You can't let kids go, in the sandbox anymore. All of these things are connected to the vaping issue.
I think if you look at the paradigm from the conversation that we're having at a government level, and it's one of the things I've always appreciated, even in the title of your show, Regulator Watch, because I think that that's what's important here. If you look at the divide of, there was far less said about the legalization of cannabis than there was about an industry that no one knew about, essentially, until fall of last year. The difference there was government controlled and licensed the legal introduction of mass scale cannabis production, because under the original regulations, it was very small. You had to get a script. You know how that works, as opposed to what Harper brought in, which was massive scale manufacturing operations. At that
A lot of
point,
people, and that's worth reminding people, it was Prime Minister Harper that did that.
yes, right. So it was a way to take absolute control from black market, for sure, but it was to take absolute control.
Well, and if I may, that's the only way that the banks will get involved. So, and
Yep.
it's always going to be black market unless banking gets involved. And banking, and as you know, there's still the big credit card manufacturers weren't even yet sure they were going to participate in the marketplace just as of 2 years ago.
And a lot to this day, like even in a lot of it hasn't changed. But how does that translate to vaping, right? Is that we have to bring to government the opportunity to put in that same sense of guidelines and controls for society to feel comfortable. So we talk about things like saying, you know what, ID verification, that's important, right? Making sure that this isn't sold to children is important. We want to play a big role in that. What is the one thing that we have with alcohol and cannabis that's the same?
I'm waiting for the answer. You're going to tell me.
Controlled distribution.
Control distribution.
Controlled distribution. Right? That's one thing that we have to start to get our heads around as an industry, right? Because if you look at what happened in the United States, they took a high-powered nicotine product, put it in 150,000 convenience stores across that country, and unleashed it. They unleashed it. Nobody can control that. And then if you look at online, why is cannabis and the regulated cannabis industry failing in Canada? Because the black market used things like online sales and home delivery services and everything else, and they did it at a far cheaper price. Mm. Right? The transfer that the government had projected from the black market to the regulated market has not happened. Right? We are a regulated industry. We have an opportunity right now to be able to be a partner with government, to do things like register our shops, because, and I hear it from members all the time. I go through all these steps, right? Like, I put in ID scanners, I have age verification, the training that goes into the staff, everything else. And the head shop across the street from me could not give a crap. They'll sell whatever. Someone comes in with expired juices and takes the dating off or whatever. They don't care, right? If we're going to mature and be an answer to harm reduction, we have to mature as an industry. And the way to mature with industry is to be a proactive partner and not only embrace regulation, but they're giving us the opportunity, with the exception of Nova Scotia, to give them a ton of input on what that regulation should look like in order to address youth uptake, because we're not going to get to a conversation about harm reduction until we address youth uptake.
Right? And I think that's a good point for me to move us over somewhere else. If I have to talk about youth one more time, I'm going to puke, because okay. I'm telling you that this should all be about adults. The whole issue is about adults and how to get them to quit smoking. That was the focus of our coverage for 2 years, because that's what really the issue was. Health Canada even discussed it. The youth uptick was a side note, even with Health Canada when we interviewed Director General Susie McDonald. Of course, the youth was top of mind. In fact, that as long as her quote unquote, well, I won't quote unquote, let me paraphrase, but essentially, Health Canada was going to allow flavors, allow legal nicotine access, as long as we don't screw it up with kids. That's pretty much what it was. And so I think that in the end, that there is that feeling that the industry dropped the ball on that topic. But unfortunately, though, there was a complete ginned up crisis that ran through too as well. So I think that was definitely a problem. Anybody who says that there was no fakeness involved in that media coverage, well, they're just lying. They're lying, or they're stupid. How could you say that every single thing CNN said about vaping is true? Every single thing the Globe and Mail or the CBC said about vaping is true. If you say that, well, then you have no brain. And I mean, that's as simple as that. You've not even done cursory look online with an open mind to find out, oh yeah, wait a minute. You're right. Four ingredients, blah blah blah. I don't even want to get into that. It's just if you can't possibly bring yourself to have an open mind when it comes to vaping, you can. I guarantee you've got closed minds on a bunch of other issues too as well. That's my rant. Let's just head over to here for a sec. This is the consultation notice of intent. Potential measures reduce the impact of vaping products advertising on youth and non-users of tobacco products, because that's exactly it, right? It's they care about youth and they care about people who've never smoked. You are
Yep.
you are damned if you are a smoker. That's kind of the way that I get it. So let's talk a little bit about this, because this was a pretty interesting go here, and you have some thoughts on it.
Well, it's certainly when it comes to the impacts of youth, we've been pretty clear, and I think from day one, Brent, right, is that one, what's the difference between the UK market and our market is the nicotine level.
Right.
The second part, and the federal government has taken action on that. We've been calling on them since March to take action on this. Is get rid of brand advertising. Period. Right. The third part is being able to address online sales in our country, right? And that comes from a two-process ID verification. So one is you verify your ID as you go onto a website, so not to get in, but when you go to the point of purchase, and then obviously when you get these products at your home, right? And then the fourth item that we feel that that's really really important is to make sure to have regulations that allow access, right? So if you look at the impact that's going to face the vaping industry, is that they're looking at the areas of what differentiates our market from those markets that have no youth uptake. So, and this goes to your point. This conversation needs to be about adults, right? Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So in 2012 in the UK, there was 700,000 vapors. In 2019, there was 3.6 million vapors. So they've embraced it. Their youth uptake's at 2%. And they allow marketing, all the names are there, all the flavors are there, right? Things that are illegal here in Canada are legal there in terms of, being able to call things like cotton candy or whatever. What's the difference? Difference is nicotine strength, right? And we know about short fills and those types of things. I'm not saying that everybody there is 20% or lower, but I even look at our own market prior to having these really large nicotine strengths introduced. Where I think you're starting to see legislators get it is that when I talk to legislators, I say, if you want to address youth uptake, here's what you do. I'm not suggesting that this is the best pathway forward for harm reduction. Where I really think Ontario is getting it right, should what has been talked about be announced and put into law, is they're saying that high nicotine strengths will be available for people to get proper education, support. Like one of the things that we hear from our members all the time is how much time they spend with people as they're transitioning. Right? Nicotine addiction through combustible tobacco is extremely difficult. In this case, it's great to talk to someone who's got off the ramp of a product that is definitely going to kill either themselves or one other smoker that they know. So if you look at, we can't just pick and choose about the things that we find convenient, right? In this case is the UK's had a ton of success at 20 milligrams, far more than Canada. There's not 3.6 million vapors here. They've had a ton of success in making this product unattractive to youth. And it is the regulators in the middle who are marketing and supporting the harm reduction that vaping offers. So if we become that partner and we hear the voice of consumers, Because what I'm hearing is that the Nova Scotia government is going to go into an election before we can get this fixed. That they're going to go into an election a year ahead before they're legally have to. There's 60,000 vapors in Nova Scotia. If I want to be a returning government, I better listen to those 60,000 vapors and then allow organizations like the CVA to come in and say, I will help you get legislation right. Because I'll tell you, without that exception, the government of Nova Scotia won't have adult only access regulated shops to deal with. They'll be out of business. I've made that point clear publicly, through media, to government, and to everybody.
So what has your membership and vapors that you've talked to, what has been the response to the position that really it's the high nicotine that's responsible, because that's really what's been communicated, not just here, in other times, and other people have made this argument to the extent that really if we just cap the nicotine to 20 milligrams, kids will stop using it because kids are drug addicts and they just love the hard high and they're going to go after the harder high. So if we can just take the high down, send them off to do some other high. That's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing kids are horrible drug addicts.
What I'm communicating
Well,
is that
I'm not saying you.
no,
I'm saying that
I don't.
argument.
I get what you're saying. What I'm saying is that I have been asked and challenged by governments across this country to give them solutions to youth uptake.
Right.
And if you hear any conversation I have with them, any member, anyone from the industry, anyone who's talked to me, is I follow it up saying, please let me have a conversation with you on harm reduction because I'm moving in many steps for those users who are 2-pack a day smokers.
Right.
I was a 2-pack a day smoker. But what I can tell you is if you start blending and looking at the data, right? We grew the market here in Canada without the industry moving to salt nicks and without moving to high nicotine products. The UK really moved their market, not moving to salt nicks, not moving to high nicotine product. Big tobacco has next to no foothold in those markets, right? And they have no youth uptake. So if I'm going to have a conversation with government, and that's where I really like the premise of where Ontario is saying, because the argument has always been we need to keep some vape products available in convenience stores and gas stations so that if you go to buy your pack of cigarettes, maybe someone will ask, hey, what's that? Do you know anything about vaping? The problem is, no offense to convenience stores and gas stations, how are they going to know anything about these products? And especially when it comes to things as complicated as nicotine addiction, as comparative to the education and the detailing that you'll get within a product vape shop, right? You want to be able to fix both problems, but in order to do that, you need a partner on the other side that wants to hear about harm reduction.
Well, and that's definitely sitting right here on my must get to questions as we're getting close to wrapping up, and that is the harm reduction question. How serious do governments actually take harm reduction as a concept paired with vaping and cigarettes? Because it seems less and less like it's a concept that's got validity.
I would suggest to you that the federal government understands the harm reduction opportunity of vaping quite clearly. From COP7, we've talked about that. The World Health Organization put a ton of pressure on Canada to ban it completely.
Of course.
And then through the crisis, it was a crisis. It was a crisis forced on us. Like, I'm not talking about a crisis of children standing on the street and vaping. I'm talking about a full out attack on an industry.
True.
That was the crisis.
True.
Right? They tried, and by they, misinformation in the media, sloppy reporting, no research, no understanding, and health officials driving an agenda of sheer and complete incompetency, right? I'm comfortable saying that because I've tried to get a hold of heart and stroke, lung cancer, begging for meetings, begging for an opportunity to talk about this. And our proposals, the CVA proposals, are almost completely aligned with those organizations, with the exception of flavors, based on the success rate of vaping, which is at a pessimistic view, twice as good as that of NRTs. Which, by the way, there's a ton of research out there on flavored nicotine gum, for example, that's far more successful than non-nicotine gum, which is considered completely respected, peer-reviewed science. But this isn't.
So what's the result when you call these
Nothing.
nonprofit?
A complete, it's as if we don't exist, right? Which is, where's the responsibility on these organizations that say that they are trusted health organizations in this country with some of the strongest brands? Cancer this is in their mandate. 7,000 chemicals, tar is the driver, lung, getting the carcinogens away from the lung, heart and stroke, increase of blood pressure, all the damage that we know that combustible tobacco does. This is 100% aligned in their mandate, and they can't even bother to return a phone call. So when it comes to the regulators, let me tell you, if we are going to be able to create a pathway so that we too can have 3.5 million vapors as opposed to that many people smoking in this country, we need to engage with lawmakers, because these health advocate groups and chief medical officers, they don't even want to have the conversation. It's easier to say it's unknown. Well, I'll tell you what's known. What's known is, as we have this conversation today, Brent, we know that at least 100 people are going to die from combustible tobacco. What we do know is it's still the leading form of death in our country. That's what we know what the long-term impacts of smoking are. Whether you agree with this number or that number, what we can all agree on is that a ton of people will die from it.
So let me bring this up again in our wrapping up, and I'm getting you're nailing in my sweet zone here. So look, how many people are going to die this year from smoking in Canada?
We have to go by the data from the 2012 report, which is 45,000 people. One of the things that I'm challenged on sometimes is that while smoking rates have decreased, what impact has that had, and then what environmental impacts has that had as well. Unfortunately, there's no way for me to track the data, understand the data. I don't have access to
Yeah,
the latest
totally.
results.
And absolutely. So look, I mean, I think the point should be made, and I made it in our last episode 2 weeks ago, which in our new studio here now with all of our new gear, we're getting there, getting close. It's fun. It's been exhausting. But anyhow, one of the last questions that I was asked Dr. Naira about was about the smoking stats, because they seem to never go down, like over decades. From the 1990s, at least in the US, the number was stuck around the same, 480,000, 500,000. So how can we go decades of millions and millions of people quitting smoking and so forth, and that number not go down? And one of the biggest reasons why I bring it up is because I have a hard time understanding how government, public health agencies, nonprofit health groups that apparently are there to help save lives, and everything else, they seem completely, totally oblivious to the argument that vaping is a tool for harm reduction. And then maybe they just don't care because they really know that there isn't that many people going to be dying. Maybe they've been lying about the number of people dying each year in smoking-related diseases, because when you take a look at vaping-related diseases, well, I mean, the CDC defined vaping-related diseases. CDC defined smoking-related diseases. I really honestly don't have any reason to believe the CDC on smoking rates when they just did this on vaping. Why? Why would you? I don't know. Somebody answer that for me.
You need someone different than me, Brent, to answer that question. But what
Yeah,
I
yeah.
will tell, yeah, what I will tell you is this, though. I mean, uh, you're like me. We've been around for some time, right?
Uh,
Uh, thousands of people will die, right? Thousands of Canadians,
oh, and I know
millions,
that for
yeah,
sure.
and millions of people around the world. So, you know, if we're going to get caught up in some really sort of dogmatic pathway, the dogmatic pathway that we should get on is that if you got the pharmaceutical industry, which the government pays pharmacists in Ontario to give NRT products and education to Ontarians from the public purse for something that's half as effective as the education in the community that's provided to Ontarians through vape retailers, we should have a dogmatic conversation in that regard.
No, fair enough. Just the key thing right here is that people are going to die for sure. They have been dying because of smoking for a long time. Vaping was created to help solve this problem and to save lives. Vaping saves lives. And so that message falls on deaf ears for people who, for a long time, have been playing games with their efforts around tobacco control. That's the only thing that I want to mention about that. Darryl, let's just wrap up here. Nova Scotia, April 1st, there's nothing we can do about that. Ontario, what's
Well,
your
I'm not saying that there's anything we can do. So I think from we've been heavily engaged. So both myself, the president of the organization, and our regional chairs and our board have been meeting with government officials from coast to coast. Every province. I'm in Manitoba this month. I'm in Saskatchewan this month. Going to Quebec this month. I'll probably be in Nova Scotia twice. In terms of what you need to know, is that if you're in BC, the government in its 10-point plan has been very open to understanding a lot of the challenges that they're going to have with almost all the aspects because they didn't understand where they were getting the information. I do not see regulations there dropping out of the sky very quickly. I think that they're going to take their time and they're going to get it right. In Ontario, I expect that what you see is what we're probably going to get. We'll have to see what the final regulations are coming out of consultations with cabinet. Quebec hasn't started their process. Every other province is pretty much status quo, except for Nova Scotia. So what we're dealing with in Nova Scotia is the following. Um, the flavor ban is in effect April 1st. That is in the existing regulation, or sorry, the existing legislation, and is a regulatory change that is done. The Nova Scotia government, which is a Liberal government right now, has suggested and told stakeholders that they won't talk to anybody, but they will table or considering tabling new legislation in order to have a more encompassing legislative framework for vaping.
mm-hmm.
At the same time, they're politicizing that they're going to go to an election early. So if they come to the industry and say, "Oh, we're going to go with new legislation," there's no way that they can get it through first reading, second reading, consultations, third reading, and royal assent in that amount of time.
Right.
So what we're seeking support from the opposition parties, and certainly seeking support from the ruling Liberals to be able to say, "Listen, what we need right now is a exemption for product vape shops as we go through a new legislative process to make sure that that adult only environment remains available to Nova Scotians, that thousands of Nova Scotians aren't left behind by this regulatory change in legislation. Otherwise, it's an election issue. And we would have to, as a community, hold that government accountable to these decisions. By the way, and I agree with you, Brent, the term youth is so overused to get absolutely no understanding of the legislation that you're passing, because it makes it reasonable rather than explaining something as complicated as regulatory system for vaping, for cannabis, for alcohol. Like these are complicated regulatory and legislative designs. So it's easy to say, I'm going to get rid of this to save the kids. Meanwhile, it doesn't save a child from anything. When it saved me when I was a kid, when I was trying to find a beer or a glass of wine or, God tell you, a cigarette. Well, because that was the first time I smoked, and that's the first time I chewed.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like government and public health and everybody else had much success in preventing people from smoking, and they're still not having a ton of success. I mean, cigarette sales are still like a huge percentage of C-store, and obviously, I mean, it's still big business. There's a lot of people smoking still.
Yep. Where I'm seeing a really interesting pattern from coast to coast, and if you and I will end on how you opened on the brink. For the first time in my lifetime, Brent, as I've seen government put big tobacco on the brink. And I've never seen that before since they got rid of menthol cigarettes how many years ago? Right?
Yeah,
They try to take over an industry, right? Open up distribution, high nicotine levels, and never before have we been in a marketing opportunity like this for nicotine products. So it's not just about smoking. Can't do it with chewing tobacco. You can't do it with, right. And what's amazing is how many politicians I met that didn't even realize that nicotine gum was available over the counter. Because they're like, well, you need a script for nicotine gum. I'm like, according to whom? I will go send my 15-year-old niece in to get you some gum right now. She lives 8 blocks from here.
and if we're in the States, you could send her for some nicotine toothpicks.
Oh, wouldn't that be great for her as well?
I really
So,
like that idea. See, that's the thing when regulators get out of the way. Now, of course, the FDA slammed down on that company in the U.S., but that's how
yeah,
you get innovation. That's how we got vaping in the first place. And it's just really important that people talk about why entrepreneurship is important, because it really is. That's part of the story of vaping, no doubt. And the stuff. I mean, harm reduction obviously is a great argument. I don't think anyone's listening, but anyhow, and I think that conversations that aren't happening. I think there should be more rights conversations. I think there should be more entrepreneurship conversations. I'm not talking about how important the economy is. I'm talking about how important it is that we innovate, and innovations don't need to come government led or massive corporation led or research tank led. They can be led from out of a garage, and that kind of thing. And vaping, is an example of thousands and thousands of people creating something
it's a
unplanned.
right. It's a tipping point, though. If you look at where we are in the life cycle of the vaping products, right, is that it started by the entrepreneur. It was started in garages. It started at flea market to its first retail shop to 10 to 100. We're now at scalability,
Oh, I understand
right?
that. Yeah.
So that where we are for regulations is appropriate. And if the U.S. hadn't gone nuts, right, and they did, for a bunch of people who didn't understand that vaping was even a thing, right? In all the government circles that I worked in, when I took the job at the CVA as executive director, this is before I took on the GR part of it, right, Brent?
Hmm.
I talked to all those that I know, and I said, I'm really excited because as a vapor, I'm going to be able to have an impact on this community. It's something that's helped so many of my dear friends that I know, because that's how I became a vapor. Was they were in the industry, they got me the products. That's how I transitioned in with no education, which is something we have to address. Um, and they're like, "What's vaping?"
Hmm.
All of them.
So,
And that was 2015.
no, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, look, let me make it very clear, right? Our show and my position on regulations isn't one where it's like all regulations are bad. That's not, absolutely not. If you go to our about section, you'll read that, we actually are positive towards regulations. They are needed, that you can't have a well-functioning market without them. As an
Yep.
individual, I would be less safer if there was no regulations on products and so forth. So no, I mean, like, obviously, and society does exist, and society in certain cases definitely has priority over the individual. So there is no doubt about that. So I mean, I think it's really important. I mean, when we sat down with both director generals, we weren't there to harangue them about there shouldn't be any regulations or anything like that. I don't think that's the case. I truly believe that Health Canada overall has done a good job. And my big position here was that they needed to get out in front of the crisis, and they didn't, and they still haven't. So I think there's a role that your national regulator, who's just legalized a product, I think there's a responsibility and a duty that they have to get out there to correct or at least amend or at least nudge the national broadcaster more towards fact than hysteria. And I believe that is what Health Canada's duty is. Certainly when it's the product. So that's my only thing about it. Overall though, I think they've been doing an okay job.
Well, and I go back to the fact that my biggest fear from a regulator is what we're seeing at some of the provincial levels,
True.
which is a knee-jerk reaction. So if you want a mistake made, you want a mistake made of a regulator that's trying to take their time to figure out the proper solution, as opposed to those who are like, I'll tell you what, the world's on fire. CBC is saying it's all wrong. It's the Dentist Association is saying that it's burning people's mouths out. So here's what we're going to do: we're going to get rid of flavors,
Right.
because that's an answer to it. It's not an answer to anything, right? And so if we really dig into the fact that they've taken their time, and it goes back to all of those people who attacked Health Canada when they didn't stop this product from becoming legalized in Canada in the first place.
Right.
They didn't just jump out from COP7 and say, you know what, here's your regulations, not going to worry about it. They went through proper process. They're going through proper process. I know from our perspective, absolutely do we wish that they had come out and talked about those relative risk statements and got those out. We will put a ton of pressure on Health Canada, because those relative risk statements are a right. You should
That's right.
have the right to understand that. You don't have the right to blueberry cupcake, but you have the right to know your relative risk. And you have a right to understand, why is this product so much more successful than the other product? And fundamentally, you have the right to know if this product has caused the lung illnesses as described. Because the one thing, and I love the way that the Brits say it, and I don't know if you know this, Brent, I got 80 cousins over on that side, and I got 6 cousins on this side. So I love them anyways. But they laugh. And they've said time and time again, not one lung illness. I don't know what you guys are talking about. Right?
Well, I'm sure they just call it bollocks, right? I mean, if we're going to talk, yeah.
But again, they don't have they didn't have a big tobacco lobby at the beginning of their pathway up. They didn't care, and they don't have a partner in it. They partnered with what you talked about, which was originally the entrepreneurs. Then some of them got scale, and then they were able to build an industry, and they were able to serve millions of their citizens, and supported by the government. So if we hold true that these are now the facts that people are saying, we want government to listen to the science, we want them to listen to the facts and everything else. Those are the facts. We can't pick and choose from those facts, right? This is a problem I had in your home province. Is they said, Darryl, here's the 5 things that you're saying that we like, and these are the facts that we can get behind. Those other facts you're talking about those same markets, We don't want those ones. So don't talk about those ones. I can't do that. I have to take it as a whole. Okay.
Well, and that is a very good spot, I think, to put the cap on our episode here, Darryl. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. As always, an excellent conversation.
Thank you, Brent. Have yourself a great evening.
You too. And yeah, thanks for coming, being the first back here after our break. So, and that's it for this edition of RegWatch. Before you head off, please do head over to support.regulatorwatch.com. That's support.regulatorwatch.com, and consider making a financial contribution to our vaping coverage. It's easy. Just dig into your wallet and find a few dollars and toss them our way. You'll be happy you did it, and so will we. And while online, don't forget to like us on Facebook and to follow us on Twitter. For regulatorwatch.com, I'm Brent Stafford.